Good afternoon to, I think it's most of you. Good morning to some of you. It's a very early good morning. And it's almost good night to our friends from Australia, but don't go to bed yet. I'm John Stewart. I spent a long time representing and working with communities around Heathrow Airport, and I'm now the Vice Chair of UECNA. As Dominique said, there'll be a lot of time later on for discussion on the agenda. I just want to spend a few minutes now on updating you on the latest situation in a number of key areas. And the first of those areas is flight paths. I'll start with the flight paths. As most of you know, flight paths are changing at airports across the world. Indeed, at some airports, they have already changed. The reason for the change is that the technology is changing. Aircraft used to be guided by ground-based technology. Now, satellite technology is used. It means that the flight paths can be much more precise. This saves on fuel, cuts down on climate emissions per plane, and allows more planes to use the airport. But for communities, it can mean narrow, concentrated flight paths. I know some of you, especially in America, are already suffering from this. My own view is that these narrow flight paths should be alternated to allow communities a break from the noise. In the UK, alternation is being planned at Heathrow. The only other option for communities is a reduction in the number of flights using an airport. We may want to discuss flight paths in more detail later on in the conference, because with satellite technology becoming a fact of life, flight paths will remain a huge concern for all our communities. I will now move on to metrics. I'm really pleased, as Dominique said, that Tim Johnson, the director of the Aviation Environment Federation in the UK, will be talking in detail later on about metrics. Metrics, that is, the way noise annoyance is measured. The webinar we did on metrics earlier this year proved to be one of our most popular, and you can catch a recording of it on our website. As I say, Tim will go into detail, but the big story about metrics that has emerged over the last decade is that the research shows that people become annoyed at much lower levels of aircraft noise than was previously acknowledged. The European Union argues that people start to get annoyed at what they call the onset of community annoyance at what is known as 55 LDEN. That is when noise averages out at 55 decibels over a 24-hour period. The World Health Organization argues for a lower level. So does the UK government. The American authorities, and I think the authorities in Brazil, go for a higher level, which in my opinion, the latest research does not support. It would be a huge achievement if every country in the world adopted the 55 LDEN measurement or lower, and perhaps we can talk about that later on in the conference. Now I want to move on to night flights. The top thing people search for on the UECNA website is night flights. They are hated by communities. The research shows that most flights which land and take off at night could do so during the day. There may be a few exceptions to this, but night flights could be banned at most airports without damaging the economy. They are already banned at some airports, such as Düsseldorf and Munich, and there are restrictions at other airports. I think it'd be really useful if together we could compile a list of the number of night flights allowed at all the airports in our countries and use that information to call for action by the authorities to tackle night flights. Again, we may well want to talk about night flights later on in today's conference. Finally, I want to talk about good practice. There are a lot of things airlines and airports can do to make life a little better for communities. Here are some of them. Listen to communities' concerns. Have regular meetings with residents. Provide sound insulation for people's homes. Airlines adopt best operational practices when landing and taking off. Provide communities with a break from the noise. Make sure airlines obey the rules. So, for example, they don't land later than they're allowed to in the evening. Yes, in conclusion, we must fight the big battles on flight paths, metrics, night flights, and much more. But let us not neglect good practice. It can make a real difference to residents' lives, as we will hear later on today. Thank you so much for listening, and it's back to you, Dominique.